At 0430, under the floodlight's pale hum, Maya Rourke realized the sergeant had chosen the wrong kind of storm to unleash. The training yard stretched before her like a slab of cold concrete carved out of the coastline, the mist rolling in thin sheets across the gravel. The 14 mph crosswind cut through her uniform, but she welcomed the sting. It kept her centered, steady, invisible. She moved into formation without a word, eyes low, presence small, the way she had practiced ever since she stepped into this program under a new name and a new purpose. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. SGT Blake Harrowhammer to the platoon paced in front of the trainees with the swagger of a man who believed the world rose and fell at the volume of his voice. Broad shoulders, squared jaw, a permanent smirk etched into his face. He scanned the line, barking half insults, half orders, waiting for someone to flinch. His gaze paused when he reached Maya, a flicker of irritation crossing his expression, as if her lack of reaction was an affront. "Rourke," he drawled, stepping closer. "You look half asleep. Maybe you need a wake-up call." The platoon chuckled, not cruelly, but nervously. Everyone knew Hammer's idea of a joke usually involved someone regretting laughter. Maya kept her breathing slow, eyes fixed past him, letting the mist sting her cheeks. Her pulse stayed level, each beat a metronome of discipline she refused to abandon. She sensed Harrow's curiosity tightening into something else. He wanted to see if she would crack. "Hold here," he ordered. "Formation stays put." He walked off toward the line of metal training drums stacked near the obstacle course, old, dented barrels filled with seawater dragged from the shoreline before dawn. The wind shifted, carrying the salty chill across the yard. Maya saw the moment he chose the one with the most water sloshing near the rim. He gripped the edges, veins rising along his forearms, and began dragging it toward her. Her stomach tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. She had endured far worse in far colder places. But the other trainees didn't know that. She kept her face blank, shoulders loose, stance neutral. Harrow stopped in front of her, panting theatrically. "Rourke," he said, "take a shower." He tipped the barrel. The water hit her like a sheet of ice, crashing down her neck, soaking her uniform to the skin. Gasps rippled through the formation. She felt the shock punch against her spine, but she let the cold surge over her, absorbing it, converting it into clarity. Her boots dug slightly into the gravel, steadying her stance. When the water finally stopped pouring, droplets streamed from her hair and sleeves in steady rivulets. Harrow laughed. "Wake up now." Maya inhaled once, a single controlled breath. She felt her body take over in the quiet, lethal way she had spent years training for training she was supposed to keep buried. But Harrow had crossed a line, and reflex moved faster than caution. She stepped forward. It was barely more than half a stride, but it shifted her center of gravity perfectly. Her left foot slid across the gravel, catching traction. Her right hand lifted, redirecting Harrow's arm as he instinctively braced. She rotated her wrist inward, capturing his elbow, and in a fluid sweep of motion, she redirected his momentum downward. The center of gravity sweep took less than a heartbeat. His balance vanished. Harrow hit the ground hard, air blasting from his lungs. The platoon froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Maya stood over him for a fraction of a second, water still dripping from her sleeves. She wasn't angry. She wasn't proud. She simply existed in a space that required precision. She released his arm immediately and stepped back into the position she had held before. Posture straight, eyes forward. Harrow groaned, rolling to one knee. Confusion flickered across his face, then frustration, then something close to fear. He looked up at her as though seeing her for the first time, and she could almost feel the way his confidence faltered. He wasn't used to being handled, let alone effortlessly. "Everyone hold position," came a calmer voice from the edge of the yard. Arden Pike approached with hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. He had watched the entire moment from the shadows near the obstacle wall. The trainees straightened instinctively, tension radiating across the formation. Harrow tried to stand fully, wincing, but forced himself into a semblance of control. Pike circled Maya like he was studying a statue carved from stormwater and steel. His gaze locked on her stance, balanced, deliberate, nothing accidental. She kept her breathing steady. "That sweep," he said softly. "We don't teach that here." A murmur rose. Harrow stiffened. Maya stayed silent. Pike stepped closer, voice low. "Where'd you learn it?" Cold wind pressed against her soaked uniform. She let it bite. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. Formation dismissed. Gear up. Briefing hall, 0600, as she passed him, his whisper barely existed. Ghost line, still hiding in plain sight. A chill ran deeper than the seawater, clinging to her skin. She kept walking, but the weight of his whisper followed her, tightening the air in her chest. She had worked hard to bury that name, to bury everything it came with, but Pike's recognition changed the terrain beneath her feet. She knew the day wasn't over, and the storm hammer tried to unleash was about to grow into something far larger. And by the time the sun rose again, the whole platoon would learn that the takedown was only the beginning. By 1100 hours, rumors about the takedown spread faster than the wind, cutting through the obstacle yard. Maya felt the weight of every stolen glance as she crossed the gravel pit, each step kicking up dust that hung in the warm midday light. The sun had shifted high enough to turn equipment shadows sharp and thin, revealing how many people were watching her, comparing stories, trying to decide if she was dangerous or lucky. She kept her breathing slow, her eyes forward, her posture quiet enough to convince herself she could still disappear if she needed to. But isolation clung to her like a second uniform. Cruz and Doc Voss were the only two who dared approach her during tactical drills. Cruz jogged up beside her as they prepared for a movement lane. Helmet clipped to his pack, grin easy and unthreatening. "Rourke," he said, nudging her shoulder. The legend grows. 8 hours, and you've already made Handra rethink his life choices. "Not funny," she muttered. "Little funny," he replied, and she could hear the smile even when she looked away. Doc Voss drifted in, wiping dust from his gloves. "People talk because they're bored," he said. "They'll find something new tomorrow." Maya wished she believed that. Instead, she felt the tension building inside her like a tide pressing against a thin wall. Harrow hadn't approached her all morning only, watched from the far end of the lane, arms crossed, jaw tight, measuring every move she made. Opponents usually glared with anger or resentment. His stare wasn't either. It was calculation. Pike was worse. LT Arden Pike never stared outright. He drifted close enough to observe, then walked away before she could read his expression. His drills were shifting to longer sprints, harder obstacles, coordination tests that didn't match the standard protocol. She recognized the pattern with cold clarity. He wasn't testing the platoon, he was testing her, narrowing down possibilities, looking for the one truth she didn't want him to find. Still, she moved through the drills with practiced calm. She kept her steps precise, knees soft, arms tucked, every movement controlled. She knew Harrow saw it. She knew Pike saw it. She hoped no one else would. The air carried a sudden radio ping. Falcon 6-2, range control, initiate Blue Zone protocols. Crews exhaled. That's new. Blue Zone meant controlled evaluations, combat drills, close-range engagements, and monitored contact scenarios. It also meant no one knew what was coming. Pike appeared at the edge of the gravel pit, hands behind his back, gaze fixed on Maya, as if the entire unit had been gathered for her alone. "Platoon," he said, voice even, "we're conducting a surprise hand-to-hand evaluation. Controlled, live contact." To volunteers, no one stepped forward. Pike nodded once. "Very well," roared Harrow, front and center. A ripple moved through the ranks. Crews shot her a brief, apologetic look. Voss inhaled sharply. Maya stood still for a heartbeat, steadying her breath before she stepped out of formation. Harrow was already walking toward the center, his boots hitting the dust with heavy confidence, but not the arrogance he had shown earlier. His shoulders were squared, eyes focused, but there was something humbler in the set of his jaw. "Let's see what you've actually got," he said quietly, not mocking, not aggressive, just honest. They faced each other at a 6-foot engagement gap. Pike walked between them, marking the boundaries. Maya felt the ground beneath her, the heat, the grit. She rolled her shoulders once, loosening her arms. Harrow mirrored her, but she caught the small hesitation in his movements. He was wary, and, for the first time, respectful. "Begin," Pike ordered. Harrow closed first, 2 long strides collapsing the distance. He reached for her shoulder, preparing a grapple she had seen 1,000 times before. She pivoted off-center, letting his momentum pass. He adjusted quickly, sweeping his arm around in a controlled arc. But she dipped under it, catching his elbow as she shifted her weight to her back foot. The trap and roll happened faster than the onlookers could track. She anchored her grip, redirected his balance, then executed a shoulder lock she released before it fully set, giving him a chance to recover without injury. Harrow stumbled, then righted himself, grin flickering. "Okay," he said, breath quickening. Again they reset. Dust drifted around them. The sun pressed heat through Maya's uniform. She inhaled once, exhaled slowly. Harrow lunged with more caution this time. Lowering his stance, she closed the distance instead to quick steps, centerline aligned. Her palm pressed lightly to his sternum, accompanied by a breath control strike that halted his motion with surgical precision. Before he could counter, she captured his wrist, twisted inward, and guided him to the ground in a clean, controlled arc. 8 seconds, maybe less. Silence expanded around them. Harrow lay on his back, staring up at the sky, chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. For a moment, Maya braced for anger, embarrassment, retaliation, the usual reaction. Instead, he laughed. A real, full laugh, disbelieving and strangely relieved. "You're not normal," he said, sitting up. "And I was an idiot to think you were." The platoon exchanged looks, some shocked, some impressed, none dismissive anymore. Maya felt heat creep up her neck, not from the sun, but from the attention she had tried so hard to avoid. Pike stepped forward, stopping only a foot from her. "Outstanding," he said, but his eyes held more questions than praise. "Rourke stay," after dismissal. Her pulse tightened. He was closing in on the truth, too close. Harrow got to his feet, still grinning. "You've got to teach me that role sometime." She nodded once, managing a faint smile. Something shifted in his expression respect, waited with humility. It wasn't a truce, it was a turning point. Cruz and Voss greeted her with wide eyes as she returned to formation. "What the hell are you?" Cruz whispered. "Someone who wants to finish this course," she replied, but her voice felt thin. Pike dismissed the platoon. As the others walked off, Maya stayed rooted, the gravel warm under her boots, her heartbeat steady but heavy. She sensed Pike standing behind her before he spoke. "You're hiding something," he said softly, "and I'm getting closer." She swallowed, unsure how much longer her anonymity would last. And as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the training grounds, she sensed the next test was already forming in Pike's mind, one that would drag her back into instincts she wasn't ready to face. At 2,230, beneath the moon's thin gleam and distant rotor noise from an overhead training helo, Maya felt the old instincts rise like a tide she could no longer hold back. The night had settled over the coastal training grounds like a cold hand, the air hanging at 42 degrees and sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Through her NVGs, the world glowed in muted greens and shadows, transforming every dip in the earth into a potential trap. The squad had already split for the capture and rescue scenario, their rubberized M4 south slung tight, their footsteps swallowed by sand and brush. Maya moved at the rear, quiet, watchful, and trying to pretend that the steady hum inside her chest was just adrenaline and not recognition of a life she'd tried to leave behind. Harrow insisted on taking point, desperate to regain authority after the earlier drill. Cruz and Voss trailed behind, scanning the ridgelines, while Pike observed from the shadows. Maya felt his attention on her every step, every breath, every movement she wished looked less trained. A burst of static hissed over the net, then silence. Cruz froze. Voss knelt. Maya felt the shift danger ahead. Harrow pushed forward anyway. Aggressors erupted from the flank, sim rounds cracking. Cruz dropped. Voss slipped. Harrow was herded into a mock kill zone, rifle empty. Protocol said retreat. Instinct said move. She dropped low and crawled. The distance to Harrow's last known position was roughly 20 meters. The first 12 were easy. Open ground broken by tall grass swaying in the helo wash from the distant training bird overhead. The last 8 required precision. She flattened herself against the earth, letting the night swallow her shape. Moving her hands slow enough to avoid noise, but fast enough to beat the simulated capture countdown, she knew the aggressors were running. Her palms slid across cold grit. Her breathing remained aligned to each shift of her weight. The NVG glow caught a sliver of Harrow curled behind a rock, his jaw tight, his eyes darting like he could will himself out of danger. 2 aggressors stood between her and him. They scanned with laser pointer detection beams sweeping lazily in arcs, unaware that someone had already breached their perimeter. Maya counted their timing. 3 seconds right, 2 seconds center, 3 seconds left. She rose into a crouch when the beams swung far, then burst forward in a low sprint that barely disturbed the air. A shadow moving through shadows. The first aggressor didn't notice her until she had closed the remaining 2-step gap. She snatched his rifle sideways, twisting it clear as she pushed him off balance. He staggered back and dropped without a sound, hands raised, to signal a simulated neutralization. The second swung toward her, but she was faster. She hooked his elbow, pivoted her hips, and brought him down in a controlled roll. His NVG lenses flashed skyward as he tapped out of the scenario. Now the gully was clear. She slid beside Harrow, who met her with stunned disbelief. "How the hell did you move?" she whispered, slow as safe. "Follow my steps." He didn't argue. That alone told her how shaken he truly was. She guided him out the same way she had entered, weaving through the undulating terrain until they reached the open ground where Voss and Cruz were waiting, both staring at her like she'd walked out of a ghost story. Over the radio, Pike's voice cut through with clinical calm. "Falcon 6 to all units. Exercise hold. Package recovered." His tone carried something else beneath it. Not surprise, recognition. Harrow removed his helmet, breath visible in the cold. He looked at Maya with a mixture of respect and awe, the kind a man gives after having his life saved, simulated or not. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You're damn Rourke. You're another breed." She didn't know what to say. Praise made her uncomfortable, but there was sincerity in his voice now, not bravado. Something mended between them, something earned rather than demanded. Pike approached from the shadows, hands clasped behind his back. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Ghostline still runs true," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. The words hit her harder than any strike in a drill. She had spent years burying that call sign, that identity, that life. But Pike wasn't accusing her. He wasn't threatening her. He was acknowledging her, welcoming her back on her own terms. Maya exhaled slowly, letting the cold air burn through her lungs, letting the weight she carried settle into something lighter. She didn't need to hide anymore, not from them, not from herself. And as the helo circled overhead and the training grounds buzzed with reset commands, she understood that tonight had been more than a rescue. It had been a return that would demand even more from her in the days to come.